Let's play a little game, scheme or execution here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Show is also available on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app, our own special little app right on your smart TV. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And thank you all so much for your patience with the erratic posting times of these podcasts. I've been a little under the weather, so thanks for keeping up with me there. Today on the show, I want to really drive at a question that I've gotten on just about every mailbag, but I haven't had a great answer to because it's a play-to-play question. It's scheme versus execution. Is this Donatel's fault, or is this, just like certain players are? I mean, this is a defense that is filled tip to tail with perennial Pro Bowlers: Danielle Hunter, Darius Smith, Eric Kendricks, Harrison Smith. Like these, Harrison Phillips has had a great year. Like we praise all these people. Patrick Peterson, maybe a Pro Bowler. Like, how can you have all these really good players and have a defense that is performing this poorly? Is that scheme? But that scheme is supposedly one that everybody's using. I mean, the Eagles run the same scheme that the Vikings run, more or less. It's a little bit fancier over in Philadelphia. They're doing something a little bit more unique there. It's actually pretty cool, and I think we could steal some stuff. But it's the same scheme that has been dominating the league for years, that Staley got a head coaching job off of. The number one defense in the league has had this scheme for years in a row, right? So what's the deal? What's going wrong? And the answer to that question is play to play. Sometimes it is that a guy just messes up, and hey, sometimes that guy is Eric Kendricks, and he's human, right? He's not immune. Sometimes it is that the scheme put a guy in a situation where he can't make that play. Sometimes it's just a hole in the coverage that they found. It's different every play. So let's do that. Let's go play to play. I have plucked out 7 explosive plays here that have all happened in the second half on defense. So we're going to talk about that and defense, and we'll go through these 7, and I'll kind of tell you what happened, and we can sort of have that talk scheme versus execution. And I also have some stuff on the offense I want to get to at the end. So if you just want to hear about offense, stick around. So let's dive into these defensive plays. The first one came on a 2nd and 9. It was the second play of the third quarter. It was a big catch over the middle to Garrett Wilson on a Caleb Evans. And it was the Vikings just getting beat by a blitz. So this is something that happened. The Vikings send 5, and the blitz doesn't get home because the blitz overloaded to a side where the offensive line was sliding. If you are familiar with all of those terms, then great, you get what happened. But basically, the Jets took their offensive line and shifted it one way over. Essentially, they had kept 2 tight ends in pass protection next to each other, turned those guys into a double team on Danielle Hunter, and then told the rest of the offensive line to cover each other's sides, right? To basically just be one big wall. Slide side is the way the Vikings call it. And they could basically shift away from Danielle Hunter because you already had a double team over there. And the Vikings blitz also blitzed away from Danielle Hunter, kind of thinking that things would slide over toward him, but they kind of got caught thinking that those 2 tight ends would run routes instead of blocking. Now that they're blocking, it sort of ruins the whole spacing of the whole thing, so the blitz doesn't get home. And that means the Vikings were in one-on-one because they were blitzing all across the field, and that meant Caleb Evans was one-on-one with Garrett Wilson, and it was just too good of a route. So he gives up a big one over the middle. I believe it ended up being like a 31-yard gain. That was the first one. So would you call that scheme or execution? For me, it's like both, right? Because at the end of the day, Caleb Evans lost a matchup to Garrett Wilson. That's execution. That is their player was better than our player. Now our player's a backup and their player is a star first rounder. So, grain of salt with that. But if you want to just write down the actual cause, their guy better than our guy. But why was our guy in that position? Why were we in a position with the backup corner was on the first round pick. We kind of shouldn't want that, right? Like that should be something that we like try to avoid. So what happened there? Well, then you get into the scheme stuff where the blitz didn't work, and the reasons the blitz didn't work is because the Jets did something in protection that the Vikings didn't expect. Okay, so you can kind of write down both for that one. But for me, if you've got a Caleb Evans one-on-one and Garrett Wilson, that's a scheme issue. So I'm going to call that a scheme issue. An understandable one. They went for a blitz. It didn't work. They got burned. That's how that goes. And by the way, if you want to know, hey, why don't you just blitz like all the time? That's kind of the reason, because there's costs on the back end to blitzing. And if that blitz doesn't get home, you can kind of be screwed. So the next one is one that maybe frustrates me the most. You probably remember it as soon as I mention it. It's a catch over the middle that Chandon Sullivan misses a tackle. And when I say misses a tackle, he just bumps into the guy. It's just one of those like basic dig routes over the middle. Mike White hits it. Chandon Sullivan is there, arms on him, ready to wrap up, and he just totally bounces off. Dude runs. It turns into a 60-yard gain. That one bugs me a bunch because the schematics of it aren't that bad. And when you think about defensive scheme, it's a lot, for me, it's a little bit less about did the play work or not. It's more, how hard did we make it? Because if the quarterback makes a perfect throw and the wide receiver makes a perfect catch, there's kind of nothing you can do schematically about that. You can have the scheme totally worked, got the double team you wanted. I mean, we've watched Justin Jefferson do this to people all year, right? Scheme totally worked. They got the double on Justin Jefferson that they wanted, and theoretically, Kirk Cousins should have to move on and do something else. But because he's Justin Jefferson, he could just throw that thing up, and he's just going to come down with it because that connection has been so fired this year. It's not a scheme issue, right? That becomes an execution thing. So, but it's like also not really, it's like nobody did anything wrong, good play, right? You just tell the offense, all right, good play, you got us that time. But in this case, and that is not, it wasn't like the degree of difficulty that I'm talking about here. It was just a throw over the middle, but it was a good throw, good catch, right? But what turns that from a first down on 1st and 10, just a good pass, to suddenly a red zone possession is that missed tackle. And if you go back and watch it, it is, I mean, just pull up the highlight video. You'll know exactly which one I'm talking about. It is a hideous missed tackle. It is, I mean, arms were around him and he just gets bounced off. And I think he was trying to grab him and like pull him back to like limit yardage, and he just slipped off him. And it's like, dude, just take the guy down. Like, attack the opposite hip. What are you doing coming in there, pads fully upright, like arms around him? It is a pathetic tackle attempt. Really easy to chalk that one up to execution. The next one, so we got 1-1 here so far. The next one is actually a run. And I'll tell you right now, this one comes to scheme. Even though a bunch of players lost their assignments, I think they were all put in really rough spots. But this is something the Vikings have been dealing with for a long time. For like a month at least is when I noticed it, but it could be even longer. This was the long running play. You may remember a long outside zone running play that ended up being like a 40-yard gain. The Vikings don't put a safety in the box pre-snap, like at all. It's like 3 times a game they'll have a safety in the snap. Some teams live with a safety in the box at the snap. The Vikings hate it, right? They want to keep everybody too high. Maybe somebody rotates down after the snap, but pre-snap they want everything to look the same. That's like kind of a whole thesis of the defense, which means you're presenting light boxes a lot, even with inline tight ends. So if they put a tight end in line, they will have 6 blockers on 6 people in the box. That is a huge advantage to the offense. And that's why some of the run plays work the way that they do. Now, the fact that the Vikings run defense is only as much of a catastrophe as it is a testament to Harrison Phillips and Dalvin Tomlinson. And honestly, the backups that were in when Dalvin Tomlinson wasn't did admirably too. And Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter, all those guys make a ton of plays on the inside and kind of stop that advantage from being the reason Vikings lose games. But sometimes it gets you. So when you run to the outside against this, I want you to imagine kind of the numbers game, right? So you run to the outside. Let's say the Vikings have 3 defenders on each side. And let's say you just want to divide it all in half. So you've got 3 blockers versus 3 defenders on the left, 3v3 on the right, right? What offenses will do is they'll take one of those guys, in this case it's the center, and they'll pull them around. And it's power, or it's just like a pin puller. There's a bunch of different ways, but it's like man blocking scheme. And they'll take one of those take a center and pull him to the left side. So you've suddenly got 4v3 unless one of our guys on the backside comes with it. That's called a pull key, and sometimes you're able to do it, but if you're Jordan Hicks, you might not be fast enough to get to clear that much space, right? So you're essentially at a numbers disadvantage. The way the Vikings fit the run is by spill and kill, which you don't need to know the specifics of who takes what gap and whatever, but just know that it's kind of everybody clog the gap to your inside, and then we're going to have linebackers chase it down. So what we want is we want that run to not be able to go north-south. We want to force that guy to go east-west because it takes longer, and then we can have safeties and linebackers and defensive backs clean it up and get all the tackles. That's what we want, right? But against that power scheme with the center pulling around to the outside, what it ends up with is, all right, you've got a linebacker going to the outside. You've successfully forced the run to spill outside, but that's exactly where he wants to go because he has a big old center lead blocking for him, and all we've got is Eric Kendricks. So it ends up in this matchup that the run hinges on a matchup between your center or your guard and our Eric Kendricks. That is advantage offense every single time. Eric Kendricks has to make the play of the year every time to do that, to make that tackle. And sometimes he does make that play, and sometimes and a lot of times he doesn't because that's not really his skill set either. He's not a big, beat up a lineman kind of guy. He's a quickster, right? He's always been a little bit smaller, and block shedding has never been his strong suit. So it's like a huge problem, right? And so that's what happens on that run. And then you just get the Shannon Sullivan, and I think it was Duke Shelley by that point, just get killed in their blocks by two wide receivers. And you just got to be able to beat a wide receiver on a block if you're a D-back. So that turns into an explosive run for that reason, but that's very much a scheme thing. The Vikings just can't play that spill and kill when they are running that much, pulling lineman stuff. It's just a thing the Jets did that countered our defense that we should have been adjusted to by this point in the game. That one goes on scheme. I have a few more plays I want to get to. I want to really take my time with this and be as descriptive as possible because this is a podcast, mostly in audio format. If you want the video version of this, I am doing a zone coverage article, and I'll also have a Patreon post that goes into all of them. The zone coverage article will go over a few of them. So patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL if you want that. That should be out later on Wednesday, and zonecoverage.com. But we will go over everything as descriptively as I can. But first, let me talk to you about the world's largest car sharing marketplace. Turo is awesome. You can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. It is the catalog is insane. You can book a huge SUV or a big minivan that can fit the whole family. You can book like a luxury car or a classic you just wanted to drive for forever, or you can test drive something you're thinking about, like an electric car. And many Turo hosts will even deliver the car right to you. So go to Turo.com and find that very cool car sharing marketplace. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Moving on with this weird episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for making it your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports today. They'll be talking World Cup and all the other big things going on in sports. All the biggest games, biggest stories, all of that available wherever you find your podcasts. Let us continue. We've gone over 3 of these plays, and I'm realizing in my list that I skipped one. So let's go back. You may remember the Danielle Hunter tight end leak play. So basically, this was or you may just remember it as a time that the tight end was like wide open in the middle of the field and you're going, oh my God, how did that happen? So here's how that happened. So what you got to know about the Vikings, this is something that Packers fans complained about with Mike Pettin a lot, and it's the same scheme. When the Vikings are in base, Danielle Hunter or Zadarius Smith will often have to drop into coverage if the Vikings aren't rushing 5. When the Vikings are in their base, that's 5 down linemen, and somebody has to back off. So that will often mean Zadarius Smith or Danielle Hunter in coverage, and that's an exploitable thing, or that's DJ Wanham, Patrick Jones, whoever's at that position, right? So that's an exploitable thing, and offenses will look at that. It's just a weakness of the way the Vikings play that defense. It makes them better at run defense against zones and stuff. They're not in base all that often, so they're usually doing that to contend with like 2 tight end stuff, and there's plenty of advantages that make it worth it, but that's the weakness. So that happens here with Danielle Hunter playing underneath on the quarters side. and it's also the weak side. So here's what all that adds up to. And this is exactly what the Jets are trying to get. They have found a counter here and they were exploiting it. This is something I bet they saw on tape and they're like, we can absolutely get them here. So when you have quarters, that's deep quarters, right? So that's going to be 2 deep defenders on that side of the field, splitting that half in half, right? And Daniil Hunter is the guy underneath it. So you have 3 defenders. 2 of them are deep and one of them's Daniil Hunter. Can you see where this is headed? So you do something with play action that gets Daniil Hunter to play run first. He has to. So he'll take a couple steps upfield, and then you'll have the tight end essentially fake like he's blocking him, fake like he loses to him, and then run out. And there's like a tight end leak, and it's sort of a little fade type play. And that's exactly what happens. Daniil Hunter does that. He backs off and he zones it off. But when you're the underneath guy, and especially when you're the edge, you're the outside linebacker, Daniil Hunter is Zadarius Smith, you're essentially told, hey, you got help over the top. You're never going to have to like turn around and carry and chase something deep, right? In very few circumstances will anything like that happen. The whole scheme is meant to cover you up, right? You are clearly the weak link. So we have a whole bunch of schematic things that are making it so you're not in that much trouble. But the Jets' play was meant to occupy those things. You had somebody running a deep route right in between the 2 quarter defenders. So neither of them knew who's supposed to come down and help this over the top, whose job is this. You're kind of muddying those rules and making it difficult to communicate. And then suddenly you have Daniil Hunter, who should be turning and carrying this all the way downfield, but he never thinks he's supposed to, so he doesn't. So the guy's wide open. Very clearly a scheme issue. I don't know if anybody made any execution errors majorly, unless you want Daniil Hunter to stop playing run first, like on the line of scrimmage, which no, you don't want that. But it's very clearly a scheme thing. So we're at 3-1 scheme here. All right. Scheme is building quite the lead. The next explosive is going to come. There's 2 explosives that happen on the only Jets touchdown drive of the day, the one that ended with that Mike White sneak that we didn't know if it was in or not. The first one came on a 2nd and 10. The second one came on a 4th and 10. You probably remember the 4th and 10. The 2nd and 10 was the second play of that drive. And it was just a half look. It was a very simple, you've got half on that side of the field, which means Cam Bynum, who, by the way, had a pretty good game. This is one of the bad moments of it, but it was a pretty good game. He was responsible for everything deep on that side of the field, and the Jets were running like a smash concept with a flat and a corner route. So what that adds up to is Cam Bynum as a half zone safety, a deep half safety, playing against a corner route. The way that this corner route was run was a really good route stem that was very fast and chewed up a lot of the cushion quickly. I'm pretty sure it was Garrett Wilson. And it caused Cam Bynum to open the gate and to basically bail and turn like he's going to have to run with a go route. And then it breaks off as a corner route, and Bynum just gets beat. That's it, what you need to understand here. Bynum gets beat on the route. It's a very simple execution one. If you are in that look, theoretically, a smash concept should be okay. The safety should be able to cover that corner route for you. That's his whole job. That corner route is sort of a beater for half looks. You know, maybe you've heard the turkey hole, which we actually hit another time later in this. But safety just gets beat. Good game for him otherwise, but he got turned around that time. Execution, we're at 3-2. The next one was a 4th and 10, which turned into a man-to-man situation with Duke Shelley of all people. So again, we've got, fifth string guy, if you count Andrew Booth, 5th string guy out there up against, Jets starters. And he plays okay on an in-breaking post route, but he goes for an interception. He thinks that he doesn't go for a swat. He thinks that ball's actually going to come for him, and he actually opens up the bread basket like he's going to get the pick. It was 4th and 10. It's not a very situational Masters moment. Now, the way that I feel about these with cornerbacks is that, look, you're playing on instinct. Cornerbacks are pretty much always going to want to go for the interception no matter what the situation is. And yes, there are some situations where an interception isn't as good, like a 4th down where it would be a turnover on downs if you just swat it. But I get trying to go for the pick. But here's the deal. When you make a decision to go for the pick, you're not just thinking about field position. You're never thinking about field position. I don't need corners to think about field position, but you should be thinking about how risky it is to go for that interception versus just the conservative swatted away. And that's the kind of conversation you can have on the sideline. And I do think that, if you get caught going for the pick and then he catches it and now you don't have a tackle opportunity and he can turn and run, which is what happens here. This takes the ball all the way into the red zone from behind midfield, from Jets territory into the red zone. If you're giving up that kind of after catch, if it's 1st and 10, you shouldn't have gone for the interception either. So that's Duke Shelley making a greedy play and getting punished for it. That is very much an execution thing. So we're 3-3. We've made a comeback here. The next one, I kind of debated whether to include it or not because it was an 18-yard gain, and that's not quite as explosive and catastrophic as the rest of these, but it's the same turkey hole deal, and it's just a really good throw and catch, and it's hard to really blame either of them. You could call it scheme because they were in a half look and you lose to a corner route when the quarterback can make that throw, but I also said before the game on the shows leading up to it, hey, make Mike White make that throw. If he can make that throw all day and you lose, so be it. But make that be what the game comes down to. And hey, he made that throw. Good for you. And that was on the last drive of the game. Set up a 1st and 10 that ended up going all the way to 4th and 10, ending up in the Bynum pick, which was a very good win for scheme and execution. So I don't know. Whatever you want to do with that one, it's a little bit of a small one. It's some of both. We went through all that and we got to it's some of both. I do want to talk a little bit about the offense. But first, look, we'll talk about it tomorrow with Matt Derry, but the Vikings are underdogs against the Lions. What? They're 5-7 versus 10-2, and the 5-7 team is favored at home by 2.5 points. And by the way, nowadays home field advantage isn't worth the 3 points it used to be. It's the 1.5. So the betting markets do think that the Lions would beat the Vikings on a neutral field. If you think that's the most ridiculous thing in the world, go to BetOnline and bet it. BetOnline is your one-stop shop for all things Grambling, not only odds and lines like that, but crazy props and live betting in the middle of stuff. Go bet on the World Cup or on basketball or hockey or whatever strikes your fancy. You can find it all at betonline.net, where the game starts. So that was a lot of defense talk to come up with a pretty wishy-washy solution, but I feel very confident in that solution, even though it's kind of like, yeah, it was about half and half. Like, I feel really confident saying it was half and half, and if somebody tells me it's all scheme or it's all execution, I feel pretty confident being able to disagree with that. So let's switch gears then to the offense. The offense I thought had a really good plan coming out. They managed to get a lot of one-on-ones, and that was really what they wanted. I think the game on offense really came down to the Jets believed that DJ Reed could hang with Justin Jefferson one-on-one. They gave him some safety help, and Justin Jefferson even called that out. But there were a lot of key moments, like the go-ahead touchdown of the game, or the final touchdown of the game that ended up being the difference, and a couple of other big Justin Jefferson catches that were just Justin Jefferson one-on-one with DJ Reed and DJ Reed not winning. And the Vikings said, yeah, our guy can take DJ Reed. And the Jets said, yeah, our guy can take Justin Jefferson. And I think Justin Jefferson, I mean, he only got like 45 yards on the game, but some of that was like really key moments, and I think it was just enough of an advantage. I will say Reed played great, though. If any Jets fans are listening to this thinking I'm disparaging, no. I thought Reed did very well against Justin Jefferson, better than just about anybody has this year. I was a little disappointed in what I saw with Sauce Gardner. He was hyped up to be a little bit more than that, but he committed a couple penalties. He got beat a couple times. He got beat by KJ Osborne once. I was a little disappointed in that just for all the hype, but ultimately, on offense, the reason the Vikings got out to that lead, I think, is that the wide receivers beat a very good secondary. Now, there were, of course, problems all over the place. There were problems in protection all over the place. Kirk Cousins took way too many hits in that game. Some of that was Bradbury. A lot of that was Blake Brandel. I thought Cleveland did okay. I thought Ingram did okay. I thought O'Neal did okay. I was really just on the two in terms of protection. But then there's, of course, Kirk Cousins himself, who sailed a lot. I mean, you probably saw it on the broadcast, like as you were watching the game. A lot of passes just went high, and some of it was because he was not stepping into it, and sometimes he couldn't because there was pressure. Sometimes there wasn't pressure, and he just like felt like he couldn't. So that's got to be something to clean up. That's got to be something to emphasize, I think, because these high passes have been something that have held back the offense all year, and it's like, until that Jets game, it was something that I was like, yeah, this is an issue. We should probably mark it down as something, but it wasn't happening. It was like happening twice a game, like whatever. But it happened a lot in that game. And so I think it might be worth emphasizing, hey, why are we not stepping up? Why aren't we feeling this? Maybe is there something going on mechanically that's screwing that up with the shoulders? That was a theory that I've had for a bit. Either way, open receivers having to, jump up for passes that otherwise they probably shouldn't is an issue. And hopefully a correctable one, because it's like the same miss every time. He's not just spraying them erratically like early career Josh Allen would, where you're going like, well, I don't know how to fix this. Dude's just like kind of spraying them. No, it's like the same. There's a hitch there, right? And that might be something that you can correct easily. But I, all I want to make sure, and I've got a pretty good amount of faith in the Vikings at this point. All I want to make sure of is that they aren't asking him to be less aggressive in any way, right? The aggression of Kirk Cousins, I think, has been a saving grace of the offense, and I think without it, I think the Vikings like lose a lot of these games that they've been very close in, right? Like they're living on the knife's edge, and I think that's enough to take them over the top. In a lot of these games has been the more aggressive nature of Kirk Cousins. I don't want to ruin that. I just want to fix what's going high here, but those high passes can be really dangerous if they are not corrected. So you do have to fix that issue. Like if you miss high, I mean, we've seen the Vikings get a bunch of interceptions that way. You probably remember the one against Taylor Heineke. That was just a high ball, came out bad on him, ends up right in the safety's lap. So if you're going to throw over the middle, that cannot be high. And it hasn't been high on that. It's always been the sideline passes that are high, which I don't know, maybe that's a hint to what's going wrong to people who know quarterback play better than I do, but something to be concerned about, I guess. I hope that gets you to understand where we are at least on the defensive side of the ball. But what's going on here? Well, sometimes the players are put in difficult positions. A lot of times they just like died on the field. Like they just like missed the tackle, or they just screwed up in coverage, and it leads to a big play. The plays I went over comprise almost half of the Jets production. Just those plays, just those explosives. You got to limit those explosives and those catastrophic mistakes. And then hopefully you can sort of choke out the offense by making them get 4 yards every time, right? So tomorrow we're on to the Lions. I'll ask Matt Derry if he agrees with the Lions being favored by 2.5 points. Always love talking to Matt Derry. Really excited for that. And then we'll do our bold predictions and our You Betcha Grambles and all of that good stuff. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull